Big news this week in the US with the re-election of Donald Trump as president. Look, we know he's a fan of the royal family. Here's the snippet.
This is with Queen Elizabeth. Right here, who was fantastic, by the way. These images, I mean, who has images like this? And these were relationships, too. Look, here's now the king. Here's Charles with the guard. And hopefully he's going to be well, because he's a really good person. Camilla is fantastic. And you get to know him so well.
He's always been very fond of the royal family, particularly the late Queen, and it appears that relationship will continue.
Yes, he does seem to have a great relationship with King Charles and, from what we now learn, Queen Camilla. I mean, really, no one does diplomacy like the royals. I think people just think that they smile and wave and shake hands, but they actually do try and get to know the people that they interact with, particularly world leaders. I mean, we've heard reports this week that King Charles would be responsible for smoothing over the relationship between Keir Starmer's government and Donald Trump, because we know that not only Keir Starmer, but also members of his government, particularly the Foreign Secretary David Lammy, have had some quite pointed negative words to say about Donald Trump, particularly David Lammy on Twitter, calling him a neo-Nazi, fascist sympathizer, racist, all the other words in the book that you can throw at him. And it's a bit awkward now that they have to deal with him as president of the United States. And we know that Keir Starmer's government snubbed Nigel Farage's attempt to smooth over those relationships, even though we know that Nigel Farage does have a very close relationship with Donald Trump. They seem to be relying more on the royal family for that, and it's understandable, because King Charles and Queen Camilla must have had quite in-depth conversations with President Trump. He seemed, to be beaming once he had met the royal family. He's had nothing but positive things to say about most of them. We know that Harry and Meghan do not feature in that, but so we know that Donald Trump has always been a fan of the royal family. His mother, of course, was Scottish, and she was a huge monarchist. And he seems, I think, it's one of the things that he appreciates most about the UK. And I'm sure Keir Starmer's government will probably be at the bottom of that list in terms of appreciation. So it's no wonder that King Charles has offered to step in to try and smooth over their relationship, because we do know that we have 4 more years of this government. So any goodwill will be much needed.
The smoothing over, I think, is very important, particularly between such historical allies. But you did mention Harry and Meghan. What does a Trump presidency mean, if anything at all, for the Sussexes?
Well, it's actually it's interesting, because it's kind of putting their purchase of property in Portugal into perspective. We know that many celebrities have been whinging online about leaving the US if Donald Trump wins. Now he's won. I suspect many of them will not leave anywhere, because they probably won't have the same quality of life that they would elsewhere. But initial reports about Harry and Meghan buying the property in Portugal was for them to have a foothold in Europe, so they can, go about their charity duties, whatever they may be. Now we're hearing reports that actually it was a contingency in case Donald Trump won, which he did in spectacular fashion. We now know that Harry's immigration records could possibly be unsealed. I spoke to someone who's actually directly involved in that court case, and he said, we're doing really well, we're winning. There's no reason for Prince Harry to have this sort of special treatments. And it seems like the courts are agreeing, so much so that the lawyers that Biden's administration sent over came up with flimsy excuses, like it would be against his privacy, even though he didn't seem to mind his privacy very much when he was talking about his frozen toddler in the book Spare. But now we know that Donald Trump has come out and said he's not going to protect Harry at all, and that he believes that how he and his wife Meghan treated the Queen was disgraceful. So what we may likely see is the unsealing of Prince Harry's records, and more probably immigration troubles. He might have his residency revoked, because it looks like he didn't disclose the fact that he used drugs publicly, even though he did write it in his book Spare. And there are other things that could sort of have negative implications on his right to remain in the US. So it's quite an interesting development. We don't know if Donald Trump will be that petty, or we don't know that if a word from King Charles might ask him to just kind of forget about it. We do know now that they have a good working relationship. So we'll have to see there. But again, it's touch and go at the moment, but it will be very interesting. I'm sure Harry and Meghan were very unhappy about the re-election of Donald Trump, especially, and they must have been shocked living in California, not knowing how most normal people live. And I'm also sure that they knew that any endorsement from them would have likely turned every state in the United States red, which is probably why they remained silent. I actually think most celebrity endorsements worked against Kamala Harris, but we still have the result that we have. So Harry and Meghan, we'll have to see what they do dealing with the next 4 years of a Trump presidency.
Now, I've only got about a minute left, and on to the next controversial royal, and Prince Andrew has been increasingly on the outer. Not only are his lodgings expected to change, but the King has also cut off his allowance. But what's the latest?
It looks like the king is trying to tighten the noose, so to speak, and pressure Prince Andrew to accept his new role in the royal family, which is nothing. He removed his state-funded security, so now Prince Andrew has to shoulder the bill for his own private security. He's also removed his £1 million allowance, so Prince Andrew basically has to fund his own life himself, and he's been pressuring him to leave his accommodation at Royal Lodge, which is a £30 million mansion with, at least I believe dozen rooms. Now, there's no reason why someone like him, an elderly man and his wife, need such a massive property. They've been trying to get them to move into Frogmore Cottage, which was the residence of Harry and Meghan before the residency was terminated there. But apparently he's not budging. He finds Frogmore Cottage old and damp and cold and just unpleasant. But unfortunately, that's what happens when you keep contacts with nefarious individuals like Jeffrey Epstein, get yourself kicked out of public life. I mean, many people are saying, why does he even need any royal residence? He can live in a one-bedroom flat in Stevenage or Goa. But he doesn't seem to be budging. And as a member of the royal family, he seems to have enough wealth of his own to sustain his lifestyle.
And so he should. Esther Krakue, thank you so much for joining us.